Hey everyone, it's been over 2 minutes, I haven't been raped yet, but I was visited by Rape Threat Dude, formerly known as Snake Pliskinist. I have a throbbing boner for the video maker. Help that boner find its mark or fuck off. I expect we will hear more from Rape Threat Dude in the future. Hi, I'm Diana Davison, Canadian men's rights activist, the Cock Fairy, co-founder of Community Organized Compassion and Kindness. I've been discussing a book by a law professor of the University of Ottawa named Elizabeth Sheehy. Her book is called Defending Battered Women on Trial, Lessons from the Transcript. I can hook you up with the book if you need it. Email is diana@canadiancock.org. So, list of characters in Chapter 2 of Sheehy's book. This is the story of Bonnie Mooney. Bonnie Mooney is a divorcee. She has 2 ex-husbands, and fresh out of the divorce from the second one, she enters a relationship with a man named Ronald Kruska. Ronald Kruska is an immigrant. He was brought to Canada when he was a young child. His parents became landed immigrants. He did not. And before the move in Germany, he was hit by a truck, spent some time in a coma, and after awaking had to relearn some basic skills like walking, talking, eating, so on, and was never quite the same afterwards. One of the side effects seems to have been that Ronald Kruska became a psychopath. He reacts extreme and violent to any sort of conflict situation, and he had a learning disability afterwards. As a result, when he got in trouble with the law in Canada, they didn't deport him because he was handicapped in their minds, and they thought it would be cruel because all of his family was now in Canada. Ronald Kruska was convicted of manslaughter and 2 counts of sexual assault. Bonnie Mooney had just left relationships. Man number 1, she charged with assault. I don't know if he was convicted or not. Man number 2 was charged with sexually interfering with her eldest daughter. And he was not convicted. He was actually acquitted of the charges, and as people can see in the link I'm providing below, bringing up charges of sexual assault in a divorce proceeding is really commonly a false accusation. I suspect in this case that that is what went on, and I'll get to that more at the end. The third character in the story is Michelle Mooney, the eldest daughter. She will be the hero. In Elizabeth Sheehy's book, she presents the case of Bonnie Mooney as the only case in which a woman hasn't killed a man. Her book is generally about women who've killed men, and she's trying to help lawyers get them off of the murder charge. She spatters this chapter with a bunch of feminist rhetoric about how women are so misunderstood, and we need to know when to believe them and when not to believe them, because according to feminists, women always tell the truth when they say a man beat them, and they always lie when you ask them whether or not they were beaten. It's really confusing, convoluted. They expect us to be able to tell the difference, and the reality is we should just expect women to tell the truth when they're dealing with the law and the courts. Now, the reality is something quite different. November 1995, Bonnie Mooney was admitted to hospital. She was driven there by a police officer after she'd been severely beaten by Roland Kruska, and he was a rather nasty man. Her injuries, putting her in hospital, caused the police to become involved, and the police pressed charges, regardless of whether or not Bonnie Mooney wanted them to do so. She refused to sign her statement, and later on she actually admitted a different statement saying that she'd initiated it and she wanted him to get out. Feminists say that she did this because she was so afraid, and so on. Let's actually look at the case and find out how this went down. James Swales, the prosecutor in the original charges of assault against Kruska, said that the Crown wanted him held in custody because the allegations and his record suggested that he was dangerous. Miss Mooney did not want him held in custody. Now, why would Miss Mooney not want her abuser held in custody? She claims it was because she was afraid, but she also says that she thought they could put him away in jail without her testimony. She felt that instead of her testimony, her 12-year-old daughter could testify instead of her, because Miss Mooney was too afraid, but she wasn't too afraid to let her 12-year-old daughter testify instead of her. So she claims she was hard done by because she thought he would go into prison with or without her testimony, based on her hospital records and her daughter getting up on the stand instead of her. She was told when she was in the hospital that she should get a police escort across the street, just across the street, to a shelter, a safe house, and that she should stay there until they had Kruska in custody. When she was assaulted and went to hospital, he was on the lam. He was on the loose. But instead of going to the safe house, as instructed by the police, after refusing to sign a statement saying that she was beaten, she decides instead to go back to her home. Now let me explain what this home was. It was a place she bought with the money she got from her last divorce, and she put Kruska's name on the land title because it was in the middle of butt-fuck nowhere. This is around Prince George, BC, between that and a place called Vanderhoof. But it wasn't in either place. It was off a lake, and it was pretty much butt-fuck nowhere. So she had this house that she could afford to buy with the money from her settlement, but it didn't have any amenities, and Kruska could do the work to create the amenities and to make this place into a nice home. So that was their deal, and as a result of the work he was putting into the place, he got his name on the title. That still doesn't make him a good guy. It just means he was rather handy to her. And this became Bonnie Mooney's biggest problem, was that Kruska was on the land title, and she'd been through 2 divorces prior, dealing with civil property settlements in the family courts. And she decided that her best option would be to try and negotiate with the psychopath instead of using the police that were making themselves available to her. She went in, okay, well actually let's go back. She didn't go to the safe house, she went home to buttfuck nowhere. And when she got there, Kruska was waiting for her. And about an hour after her release, the police were diligent enough to go to the house and check up on her to find out if she'd seen him, because they were looking for him. They wanted to arrest him. And knowing that he was hiding out back with a gun, and apparently he'd been there saying, "I'm so sorry, please don't have me charged, I don't want to go back to jail." So he's hiding out in the back, and instead of telling the police that he's hiding out back, she says, "Oh, he's here, he said he was sorry, and then he left." So the police go, "Okay, well let us know if you hear anything more from him." And off goes the policeman. And her neighbor came over shortly afterwards, having seen the police just there, and says, "How are you doing?" And she goes, "Shh," and manages to tell her neighbor that Kruska's hiding out back. And she apparently knew her neighbor was going to go tell the police. This is her justification for not having helped the police. She figured her neighbor would do it. Now, why would a neighbor call the police after they'd just seen the police there? It's absolutely ridiculous. Yet she wishes us to believe that it wasn't Bonnie Mooney's fault that the police didn't help her. So now Bonnie Mooney is actively harboring a criminal who's being sought for arrest in assaulting her. And so potentially, yes, he did threaten her into saying, "Change your story." And what he offered her in return was that he wouldn't charge her anything to sign the property over. Now Bonnie Mooney is making a decision. She's got 2 young daughters that are living with this man. They're living with this man because after having divorced a guy she accused of sexually assaulting her daughter, she chose to buy a house with a man convicted of 2 sexual assaults and manslaughter. But now apparently she's very worried about her daughter's safety and everything, although she's also said in the past that Kruska never threatened her children. Her eldest daughter, Michelle, actually stepped in when he was beating on her mother and tried to stop it, and he said, "Get out of this, you bitch," or something like that. So it's not that he was never actually aggressive towards the children, he just hadn't actually hit them yet. Now Michelle was willing to get up and testify against Kruska in court because her mother wouldn't do it herself. Bonnie Mooney wouldn't testify against him in court, therefore Bonnie Mooney was his friend, and Michelle, as you will see, becomes his enemy. She put her daughter as the bigger enemy than her in the eyes of a psychopath. What Bonnie Mooney did was she went to the prosecutor and asked him to drop the charges against Kruska. He said no. And she said stuff like, "Oh, this is a load of bullshit." She was quite aggressive, to the point that the prosecutor, James Swales, actually said, "If you don't stop with this fake story, I will charge you with contempt of court. We need to put this man in jail." She later claims that she wouldn't change her testimony because she was too afraid of him. If she was afraid of him, she would have wanted him put in jail for longer. But okay, let's go along with this story for a bit, that she changed her mind and she was doing what he said because she was afraid of him. Still doesn't make sense. The prosecutor ended up cutting a deal with Kruska because he couldn't get as heavy a sentence as he wanted without Bonnie's testimony. And she's crying all like, oh, hard done by, because they apparently told her that they didn't need her testimony because Michelle could testify for her. And all of the police officers involved say, no, that I never told her that. So she basically changes her testimony and refuses to cooperate with them. And then when they ask her on the reduced sentencing based on her not cooperating, they could only put him away for a short time period. It ended up being 21 days. They said, would you like a protective order in place? And she said, no, absolutely not. Her statement, because she didn't testify, to the judge, her statement submitted was that he was a great husband and a great father to her children, and that this is a one-time incident. He's never like that. And Bonnie Mooney did everything she could to keep Kruska out of jail. She then claims that she was horrified he only got 21 days. And we're, as the public, we're supposed to feel really bad about this, okay? I'm going to link to the articles below, and I really suggest you read it because, first of all, what I'm saying is really hard to believe unless you see it for yourself. And second of all, the summaries of these cases aren't really very accurate. So check out the links below. As soon as Kruska was released from prison, Bonnie Mooney initiated contact. She claims later that she wasn't doing that so she could be sure that what he did was he went to live with his parents when he was released because he couldn't live with her. She was then separated from him. And but without a restraining order because she refused this restraining order. So she was calling him on a regular basis, trying to negotiate the property. And this now is not a domestic assault issue. This is now a civil issue. She wants to get this property into her name, and she doesn't want to pay him a dime. Kruska had said, I won't charge you to sign the property over if you don't get me, if you testify that I didn't assault you first. You say that you hit me with a poker or whatever, which is what she was doing. But when he got out of jail, he had a little bit of change of heart, and he said, I've done a lot of work in that property. I want $15,000. Mooney said, I can't pay you $15,000, so I'm going to have to sell the property, but I'll do that. And it kind of went back and forth with these negotiations. And in the end, at one point they got together and had a meeting. He said, let's meet in a public place. It was a McDonald's or restaurant, according to the courts in one of the decisions. And then he said, let's go meet in a park, but it was still a public park, so she went along. They both drove trucks, and he started to get angry, and so she freaked out and took off, and he chased her around in the truck, and she was running red lights and almost hitting civilians and so on. And she ended up taking herself to the police station saying, I've just been chased around the city by this guy, and I'm really scared of him. And the police officer took a report. Most likely I also heard that there was a property dispute going on. He went and consulted his superior, and even though he'd looked up Kruska and seen that he'd been put in jail for assaulting her, he failed to investigate further. That becomes relevant. But ultimately he said to her, this is really a civil case, so your property dispute is civil, and you should go to family court and try and get some sort of restraining order. Now, I don't know if he knew about the past case where she had basically turned evidence against them and changed her story and refused to cooperate with them, and that's why he didn't want to pursue some sort of restraining order, whatever. He was investigated, and the police found the internal investigation found that he had actually not done his duty properly by failing to investigate further or taking any action. And this ultimately becomes her court case. But anyways, she didn't follow his advice. She didn't hire a lawyer. She didn't look into it. She didn't file any petitions against him or take any action herself. What she did do was continue to phone Roland Kruska, and she took this situation, and this is ultimately what results in the tragedy. Instead of just saying, like originally, I'm just going to sell the property then and pay you out and just be done with you, get you out of my life, she had a friend who became homeless or for whatever reason was living with her, staying at the house. And they decided that, hey, what if we don't sell the property? What if I build a cabin on the back of buttfuck nowhere so that my friend Hazel White can live there? So she contacts Roland and says, look, dude, I could pay you the $15,000 or I could not do it. Right now, these aren't her words. This is my summary. So she says, I don't really if I have to pay you $15,000, I can't do this thing. And what I really want to do is build a cabin for my friend on the back and have you just sign over the property to me. So basically, I don't want to give you any money. And he really freaked out because he says, well, if you can afford to build a cabin, you can afford to pay me $15,000. So fuck you. And their phone conversation on the morning of April 19, I can't remember the exact day. I'll post it in here on the text. So in April 1996, they had a conversation in the morning, which ended up with, shut up. No, you shut up. Right? It was a really, really angry conversation. And Bonnie claims she didn't phone the police to report any concerns because she didn't think that Kruska was going to actually show up in her house. And yet, of course, she's going to then sue the police because she thinks they should have known it. What he did do was show up at her house with a sawed-off shotgun, broke through a glass door at her house. Her friend apparently, although I don't know if this is confirmed, said, Bonnie, he's after you, get out. So Bonnie Mooney smashed a window in the bathroom, jumped out, ran to a neighbor's house, and in the meantime, Ronald Kruska shot Hazel White in the back, killing her. He also shot at her daughter, Michelle, who was the only one actually willing to testify against him, and previously he hadn't shown any aggression towards her. But thanks to Bonnie Mooney, now he wanted to kill her. Shot at Michelle, and her arm was left hanging by a thread off her shoulder. And Bonnie Mooney, running unharmed, bailed out the window to a neighbor's house, and she calls them, looks out, and her house is on fire. Kruska then shot himself in the head and after setting the house on fire. Now, who's the hero in this situation? Hazel White, presuming she actually said, Bonnie, run, abandon your children, jump out of the house, leave them behind in this home with the guy with the sawed-off shotgun. So she's a hero, and she got a medal afterwards. But Michelle Mooney has her arm shot nearly off her body. She thinks to rescue her youngest sister, because there were two daughters here, gets her youngest sister out the window that their mother broke. That girl, Christy, runs in one direction. Then Michelle, still with her arm half hanging off her body, gets herself out the window and manages to make it to the neighbor's house where her mother was. And her mother then calls 911 back and says, how do I staunch some bleeding? Okay, so the court case that is being discussed is Bonnie Mooney, after the fact, suing the RCMP, every police officer she's ever talked to, including the people in November who tried to help her, and ultimately the guy with the truck incident 7 weeks prior to the shooting ended up being the one who was the only one she could actually charge because he was found to have not pursued her complaint properly. So she sues everybody she can think of and the Attorney General of Canada and whoever else she can think of because she wants some compensation. And one of those reasons for compensation is her guilt. The guilt that her friend died and the guilt that her daughter got her arm shot off after she left her in the fucking house with a psychopath with a sawed-off shotgun. And she wants the Canadian public to compensate her for these choices. And Elizabeth Sheehy wants the Canadian public to feel guilty that we didn't do more to help Bonnie Mooney and her children. The one good thing I can tell you about this is that after these events, Michelle Mooney was taken away from her mother and put into foster care. She was estranged, is the word used in the courts, from her mother. Basically, Michelle Mooney realized that her mother was fucked in the head. Now I'm asking the rest of you to realize that Bonnie Mooney was fucked in the head as well. We, the public, do not need to feel guilty about our failure to respond to this woman because we did respond. And Bonnie Mooney's choices were not based on fear. She had already sued 2 ex-husbands in the past. She was not afraid of charging. She charged them with crimes, assault and sexual interference. She was not afraid of charging men with crimes in the past. The only difference, the only problem here was that she thought that she could be more clever than the legal system. Canadian public, what do you owe women like Bonnie Mooney? Instead of paying out $500,000 after the fact, to situations where children's arms get blown off, and feminists are telling us not to have these children removed from the homes of mothers who stay in abusive situations. They think that's a cruelty to the mother. Instead of paying them all this money after the damage is done, why don't we take money like that then, if we have to pay it, and put it into something called the Bonnie Mooney Institute, where we train women how to be responsible. We train women how to make better choices. and we stop giving them a legal pass. That's my suggested solution. And Elizabeth Sheehy, you also mischaracterized the reasons for judgment. And now for the rape joke of the week. Thanks to the leader of the patriarchy party, Eric Duckman. People talk about gang rape, but seriously, who'd be crazy enough to rape a whole gang?